Manchester United is falling on hard times by their lofty standards, but the problem is not going to be solved as long as Sir Alex Ferguson remains around Old Trafford. I'm going to talk about why that is here on Pints and Punditry. Welcome back to Pints and Punditry here at the Pitchside Pub. We're coming off a Manchester derby in which Manchester United suffered yet another tough defeat at the hands of cross-city rivals Manchester City, and things are getting ugly in and around Old Trafford for a lot of reasons that I'm going to talk about here in a second. But before I do, make sure you hit that subscribe button for me down below. Go ahead and like this video while you're at it. Get in that comment section. I want to hear your thoughts, Manchester United fans. Chime in. I want to hear your reaction to all of this because I've got some theories that you may not like to hear. And of course, follow us on Twitter at the Pitchside Pub. Manchester United is in a tough spot. They are not competing the way they want to despite spending a ton of money. Erik ten Hag, is he the answer? Is he not the answer? How much of this falls on his shoulders? And some of it does. But here's the overriding problem at Manchester United. It's the presence of Sir Alex Ferguson and the fact that he is still in and around this club. He's still involved with this club, and his presence looms like a shadow over everything they do. The man has been gone for 10 years, and I do not want to discredit anything that he achieved or his players achieved or that Manchester United achieved during his very long tenure from, 86 to 2013. But he hasn't coached in a decade, and yet his shadow still looms over everything that happens at Old Trafford. Everybody is still compared to Sir Alex and the glory days, and that's just simply not fair to Erik ten Hag or Ralf Rangnick or Jose Mourinho or David Moyes or anybody who has come into Old Trafford and into Manchester United to manage them since then. We all knew, everybody knew it was going to be tough shoes to fill when Sir Alex left in 2013. That was a given, that was widely reported, that's not breaking new news. But his involvement still looms, and everybody's still making the comparison. It does not help that half of the pundits out there on TV are former Manchester United players from their glory days. Roy Keane and Gary Neville, Paul Scholes. Like, these guys are still on TV, and they reiterate this sort of talking point of this is not the Manchester United way, and this is not up to Manchester United standards, and this can't happen, and we should remove Bruno Fernandes' captaincy from Roy Keane. With who? Who are you replacing him with? They have all sorts of criticisms and no answers. But the problem is they're comparing things to the glory days, and what no one wants to admit is the massive financial advantage that Manchester United had during those days. And again, I'm not cheapening anything they accomplished. They earned that financial advantage. That was earned. They established themselves as the biggest club in the world. But they're not the biggest club in the world anymore. Or if they are, there's plenty of competition, and the gap has closed. There are tons of big clubs. They may not even be the biggest club in their own city. And I'm not going to get into a City versus United debate on who's the bigger club, because there's a million different ways to define big clubs. The point is, there was a time in England and in Europe where they could outspend most or all of their competitors, and those days are gone. They can still spend a ton of money. The Glazers are not the problem here. They are a problem, but they are not the problem here. The problem is that every United fan and former player and board member and everybody else under the sun who was alive for the last 20 or 30 years and remembers the glory days still wants to compare things to those days. This happens in America too with the Yankees and their once massive financial advantage over the rest of baseball. And the fact that a lot of other teams have caught up and they don't have the massive financial advantage that they once had. They're a big club with lots of money and plenty of money to work with and should be good, but they have to be smart as well. And that's what United does not do. They're not smart. There's been too much changeover in managers. None of the managers have lasted more than a couple years. None of them feel like they have the real authority they need to make the moves they want to make. And hey, maybe it's not warranted. Erik ten Hag, you were largely responsible for bringing in Antony, and he's not working out so well. So I get it, but there's no continuity and there's no real leadership here. Manchester United cannot get by just by spending a ton of money anymore, because you know who else spends a ton of money? City and Liverpool and Chelsea, for crying out loud, another club that spends and it's not doing them any good. And Real Madrid. They got Jude Bellingham over Manchester United. Could we imagine that happening 20 years ago under Sir Alex Ferguson? No way. So we have to accept that these days are gone and stop making these comparisons. And as long as every pundit out there is still a former Manchester United player and is still trying to relive the glory days and hold them to that standard, this is never going to get better. As long as Sir Alex Ferguson is still up in the box, literally looming over the coach, literally looking down upon him, and that shadow is still there, no coach is ever going to stand a chance. As soon as some sort of leadership comes in and the fan base recognizes and accepts, and former players recognize and accept that the playing field is now more level, and if Manchester United wants to compete, yes, they're going to have to continue to spend a lot of money, but that other clubs are also spending a lot of money, and they need to do it more wisely, more efficiently, and just flat out more successfully. Bringing back Cristiano Ronaldo, not a good move. Spending a ton of money on Højlund and thinking he's going to come in and be the answer immediately. Not a great move. Nothing against Højlund. I think he's going to be a fine player, but he's not ready yet. Antony, not ready for this level yet. There's no cohesiveness, no strategy, and they're in sort of that group with Chelsea of just spending money aimlessly and not having a good strategy. And it all goes back to the top. And the fact that every manager that has come in for a decade now, is looking over his shoulder at God, right? The God of Manchester United, who's sitting up in a box, watching games, and still looming. And they cannot get out of that shadow. And until Manchester United admits that those days are over, and now they are just one of many big, rich, wealthy, successful clubs, and that they have some real competition. Until they admit that, they will never return to their lofty status. I would love to know your thoughts. I'm sure this is going to be controversial. I'm not trying to be controversial. That's just how I see it. Sir Alex is just sitting there looming large, getting in the way of everything, and it's not necessarily his fault. He was so successful, the club cannot move on and still has not moved on. But I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Get down in that comments section for me. If you don't already subscribe to the channel, go ahead and do that, and follow us on Twitter at Pitchside Pub. Thanks as always for joining us here on Pints and Punditry at the Pitchside Pub.